Another data slate and yet more changes for the Custodes. It seems like they are constantly getting tweaked either for better or for worse every single data slate at the moment, which I guess does just go to show how hard it is to balance some even more elite than Marine models in regular 40k. But this time the changes in terms of points are overall fairly minor. They have, however, got a whole brand new detachment to play around with, which is called the Lions of the Emperor, and it may well be one of my favourite detachments yet. It really is, in my opinion, absolutely awesome. But before we get to that, we are going to look at the points. As you can see, it is a bit of a mixed bag. There's a fair bit of green, but also a few notable red changes. Alea has dropped 10 points, so making any Sisters of Silence focus units you bring just that little bit easier to add into your army, and of course potentially giving you some slightly cheaper fights first on something like a unit of Vigilators, which is actually a fairly scary prospect into Eldari or Tyranids or Thousand Suns. You also see some drops on another Sisters of Silence HQ, the Knight Centura. They dropped down 15 points to 55, which is okay. I mean, I'm not super sold on the Sisters of Silence in general for Custodes, but if you do enjoy running them, that is two noticeable drops in terms of what you can bring. But what is probably more impactful overall is all of your Shield Captain units, they drop 10 points. The regular one is down to 130 points. The Alaris Captain also down to 130, and then the Captain on Jetbike is down to 150. So those are definitely some nice changes, and they do incentivize you to bring a few more shield captains in your army. I've personally always loved the Alaris Captain anyway, so having him be a bit cheaper is something I am very fond of. The Jetbike Captain is now a little bit better. I personally wouldn't have minded seeing him at 140, to be honest, but certainly at 150, he is a much scarier little addition to a list now. Games Workshop also clearly want to push Custodes players towards more guard units and away from the regular spam that is Wardens and Blade Champions, and they've done that in two ways. The first is by dropping Custodian Guard by 10 points, so it's now 170 points for 4 or 215 points for 5, making them just about 43 points per model, which isn't actually bad for their profile. It definitely does make them a slightly more usable option in lists, but to make that decision even easier for you, they've also increased the cost of the Blade Champion and the Wardens by 10 points each. The Blade Champion is now 120 points, and the Wardens are 210 for 4 or 260 for 5. So they're still good. I still think the Blade Champion is a great datasheet. I still think Wardens are very, very strong. And in some cases, it may actually not be a huge change. If you're getting a 10 point cheaper Shield Captain for the drawback of having a 10 point pricier Blade Champion, then that is essentially a wash. And if you are getting 10 point cheaper Guard and still bringing Wardens, they're 10 points more expensive, again, that is a wash. It's really only going to make a big difference if you were running the lists where you had 2 or 3 Blade Champions leading 2 or 3 units of Wardens, which admittedly was quite a strong meta build, and a lot of people were doing that. But if you were kind of going into that list style, you could find your army going up by a good 50 or 60 points, which definitely does hurt as Custodes. For me though personally, and as you know, I'm not really a super competitive player, but I've always loved a slightly more balanced list with this army and with Custodes. So I found that the army that I tend to play around with and have run before is actually roughly the same as it was before. I think having the new detachment as well, that does incentivize bringing some characters, and certainly with the new cheaper shield captains in particular, having those be a bit cheaper is very welcome. And if you are running the new detachment, I think you will find that adding them in is quite easy to do now. Elsewhere though, in terms of increases, the Venerable Dreadnought and the Telemon, they both went up 10 points. So the Venerable is now 170 and the Telemon is 225. This is of course a direct response to the Dreadnought spam of Solar Spearhead, and you could find, again, if you were running a list with a lot of those in, could be 50 odd points pricier, especially if you are running a Solar Spearhead and had a few Dreadnoughts in there, as well as maybe a Blade Champion and Warden combo just to add in some infantry punch. If you are doing that, then compared to pre-Dataslate, worst case, you could be looking at anywhere from 50 to 100 points more in your list. So definitely if you are running the meta builds, you have been hit relatively hard. And I think if that is your position and you are playing competitively, overall, it is a nerf because I don't think the drops to the shield captains and the guard is enough to fully balance out that change and that increase on those key units. But I think if nothing else, it does push you in a slightly different direction and does incentivize things like the shield captain and the guard. Maybe it's not going to be quite as strong as the dreadnoughts and the warden spam, but it is a slightly different direction, and you can certainly still build a strong Custodes list with things like the shield captains and the guard in. And in terms of diversifying your build for the Custodes, I think that is overall a good thing for the game anyway. The final changes before we go on to the detachment is that the augury uplink for the Solar Spearhead has also got a bump in points. It is now 35 points instead of 25, so 10 points more than before to get that feel no pain. That does hurt, but again, I think it is actually fair. A 5-up feel no pain on a custodian character is actually quite a big force multiplier when you have that good toughness, a load of wounds, and those amazing saves. So I personally don't think it's a wholly bad change overall. And to balance it out, the Solar Spearhead did actually also get a small buff. The stratagem of Unstoppable now can be used in the movement or the charge phase. Previously, it was just the movement phase. So now you can burst through walls when you are either just moving around or when you are charging. And that just means it's a lot easier to keep your dreadnoughts or your bikers safe and out of line of sight and behind cover until they really are ready to launch themselves into the enemy and avoid things like Overwatch for as long as you possibly can. So as I said, I think overall it is a slight nerf to the Custodes, but there are some good changes here. And as someone personally who likes the shield captains and the regular guard squads, for me, it isn't a really painful one, but I do think if you were spamming dreadnoughts and blade champions and wardens and going for that top tier competitive build, yes, you certainly will feel a pinch in terms of what points you can spend. However, enough of the relative doom and gloom, onto the good news, and that is that you get an entirely brand new detachment. The Lions of the Emperor is really cool. It may not be an auto take, I don't think. I still see the Shield Host and the Solar Spearhead as good, if not slightly better detachments overall, but this one is very much a viable pick. The detachment rule is against all odds, and what this does is that each time a Custodes non-vehicle unit from your army makes an attack, if they are more than 6 inches from any other friendly units, you get +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Now, yes, the +1 to hit is often going to be irrelevant because most of your stuff does hit on 2s. In fact, I think all of it does. But being able to get around things like stealth or other -1 to hit debuffs does still make it a very helpful rule to have in your back pocket. And the +1 to wound is massive. This is going to let your Guardian Spears wound Marines on 3s when they're shooting or 2s in melee. And then your Castellan Axes will be wounding those toughness 9 vehicles on 3s instead of 4s. So it is really great, and it's definitely going to help all of your infantry units with their output quite significantly. Your jet bikes, on the other hand, they do already have Lance, so it is less relevant on them when they're charging in. But still, if you are stuck in an ongoing combat, it is going to make even your jet bikes much killier and a lot less likely to be bogged down by chaff and huge enemy horde units all game long. I also really like that because of the way Custodes play and the size of your army usually, keeping those units 6 inches apart isn't going to be that difficult a lot of the time. And sure, there are going to be occasions when you want to gang up on a big scary enemy like Angron or an Imperial Knight. So in those cases, yes, it will be difficult to get this buff off. But I think most of the time, this will be having an impact on at least a good majority of your units, and anything from your Sagittarum to your Custodian Guard to your Wardens, they are going to really like this. It is just a really simple, straightforward, and solid buff to your melee and your shooting output. The detachment as a whole is really focused around the unique lion-esque solo fighting style of the Custodes, which is of course very, very different to the wolfpack style of the Marines, and so your enhancements also represent this and bring some really potent buffs to your characters. So Superior Creation is 25 points, it can go on an infantry model, and it allows them to revive when they are destroyed at the end of the phase. It's like the other ones, it goes off on a 2+, and they are brought back as close to where they were destroyed, not in engagement range, but they come back with full wounds remaining. So getting back a 7 wound Alaris Captain ready to fight the enemy all over again is incredible, and in my opinion, definitely worth that 25 point cost. Presidius can go on any Custodes model. This gives the bearer Lone Operative and Stealth, and this one is also 25 points, and again, I think it's just fantastic. Getting Lone Operative on an Alaris Captain to just hang around and drop right where the enemy doesn't want him for some secondaries or something, and be untargetable potentially for a good long while is really strong. Putting this on something like a Jetbike Captain or a Blade Champion so you can get up the board and into position much more reliably and safely until you are ready to charge in is also a fantastic use for this. It is going to make your HQ that you put this on just way more durable in the early stages of the battle, which is so important for Custodes. So I would say this one, in most situations, is practically an auto take. Next up we have Fierce Conqueror. This is 15 points, so it's a little bit cheaper. This is Shield Captain only. It gives you +2 attacks for each 5 enemy models within 6 inches of the bearer. So it's actually quite a big aura, and you could, in theory, dive a Jetbike Captain into a unit of 20 Orc Boys or Gaunts, and depending on your positioning, get yourself a flat +8 attacks, or almost certainly +6 at least, which is just incredible for the cost. And even into things where it's slightly less amazing, like just 5 Terminators, getting an extra 2 attacks for Custodes can make all the difference, especially with your +1 to hit and wound, and having your Martial Qatar to potentially get you sustained hits. You can quite reliably wipe out entire 5-man squads with a single HQ character really, really easily. Finally, we come to the cheapest enhancement. This is Admone Mortis. This one is really cheap at 10 points, but still, in my opinion, incredibly worthwhile. Again, it's Shield Captain only, but it grants you +3, yes, +3 to the strength of your melee weapons, and also gives them +1 AP and +1 damage. So an Alaris Captain with a Castellan Axe, they now become a Strength 12, -2 AP, 4 damage weapon, which is insane. By himself, he is going to be wounding knights on 3s, and with the lethal hits Qatar up, he could do around 10 damage to an Imperial Knight solo, so he's devastatingly good. He can kill most light or medium vehicles outright by himself in a single round of combat, so this just makes him amazing. It's also really good on Blade Champions or Jetbike Captains. It just turns your characters into absolute blenders. So for very, very good enhancements, I would say you'll be taking 3 of them in some combination most games, especially as you will likely have a lot of characters in this detachment to put them on. And personally, out of the ones that I like the most, Admone Mortis, Fierce Conqueror, and Presidius, I would probably be taking almost every game. You do, of course, get your usual 6 stratagems as well, and these are really good, and they include some old returning favourites from previous editions. They are also all 1 command point, so they are relatively cheap, and that's good because I think almost all of them you are going to want to be using quite regularly. Gilded Champions is up first, and potentially this could be the best of the bunch. It is brutal. You get to pick a character model that's used its once per game datasheet ability, and it resets it so you can use it again later in the game. You can only do this once per character, so you can't use the same character's once per game ability over and over again, but you can use it on different characters each turn if you want to, and getting things like the advance and charge on your Blade Champion again, or activating both Qatar stances on your Shield Captain's unit twice, or even using Trajan's Moment Shackle twice in a game is just brutally good, one of these can easily swing a game in your favor from that just one use alone. So being able to use this on different characters is incredible. 2 turns of Trajan getting a 2-up invuln or having 12 attacks is insanely good for 1 command point, and equally having 2 turns of advance and charge on a Blade Champions unit could get you into 2 separate combats that will just win you the game. So I can see this stratagem being used a hell of a lot to get the absolute most out of your characters. Unleash the Lions is a returning favourite, which you may remember if you've played Custodes in earlier editions. This one lets you, in your command phase, pick a unit of Alarus or Aquilon Terminators, and they split up into separate units, each counting as their own unique individual unit. So if you took a unit of 6 Alarus, if you were a crazy person, and used this turn 1, you would in theory get 6 separate single units of Terminators, each of them able to use from Golden Light to just yeet into reserve and then drop down. So you could really easily with this get a solo Terminator in each board edge and in the middle of the board with absolutely no problem, aside from enemy screening of course. It is just so powerful. It's a brilliant utility tool as well as a really strong defensive one, because it gives your opponent the absolute most target saturation that they have to deal with, because they have to deal with 6 individual units rather than just one big blob that they can focus all their firepower on. Defiant to the Last is done in the fight phase just after an enemy has selected targets. It is a 4+ fight on death, but you get +2 to the roll for characters. Funnily, this isn't just infantry or anything, it means your dreadnoughts can, in theory, fight on death too. They do count as being on 1 wound, but surprise attacks from a Telemon that the enemy thought was going to die before it could swing is a very nasty surprise potentially, and for 1 command point, I think a very worthwhile use. Getting it on a 2+ of course is really good on your characters, and using it on a Blade Champion could potentially be amazingly good. It can almost guarantee that he is going to take down an enemy unit that charged into him and thought they could kill him before he could swing. Thanks to his amazing profile, he can take down most, if not all, of an enemy unit as they kill him. Up next we have Maneuver and Fire. This is in your movement phase. After a Custodes unit has fallen back, you can use this and they can still shoot and charge. So giving you a very nice, reliable fallback, shoot and charge, which for a small army like Custodes is incredibly strong. It can help you avoid being bogged down, and in theory, it's also really helpful if you need to spread a unit outside of 6 inches from another to get that detachment bonus, or if you've got 2 enemy units nearby, to get your units apart from each other so that they both get that +1 to wound buff. Next up we have Peerless Warrior. This is done in the fight phase. It gives a Custodes unit precision. With +1 to wound and precision, this makes even regular guard squads absolutely insane into enemy characters. There is honestly not much that will survive even just 4 Custodian Guard fighting into them and being able to allocate their attacks into a character. With 5 attacks from your Guardian Spears at strength 7, -2 AP and 2 damage with +1 to wound, most enemy characters that are hidden in a squad will die if you can precision all your attacks into them. And then finally we get Swift as the Eagle. This is the last stratagem. This is in your opponent's shooting phase. It gives you a nice bit of reactive movement. After the enemy has shot, you can pick a unit that was selected as the target and they can make a d6-inch move. So it can let you get away and out of line of sight from any further shooting, or just help you get up the board a bit more, closer to an objective, or for an easier charge in your following turn. It is just invaluable to get a bit more mobility in an army like the Custodes, and you don't even have to take any casualties, you just have to be targeted. So even if the enemy shoots at you and doesn't kill any of your models, you still get to make a move and get a few inches closer to wherever you need to be. Overall, I just think it is an amazingly fun sounding detachment. If you like an infantry heavy Custodes style like I do, you just get so much from this. The bonus to wound is amazing. The enhancements are fantastic for a HEROHAMMER style list. The strats are all solid and cheap and powerful and fun. It is just all round a strong, exciting, interesting and unique way to play Custodes, and I personally can't wait to try it out. I think it's going to prove a very effective way to run the faction, if I'm being honest. But that's going to be it for today. As always, I'd love to know what you make of the Custodes points changes and also what you think of their new detachment. Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.